A big hello to you, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you up here to the loft on Weir Yard. Now today we're going to be taking an exclusive first look and having a play with an all new product that's come through from DCC Concepts, and I'm really quite excited about this because it addresses something that I know I for one have really wanted for quite some time, and that's lighting in buildings that you can just turn on and off through the DCC system. And I also don't want a huge amount of extra wiring, I don't want extra switches, and I certainly don't want to ponder how I'm going to get 5 volts to them. Well, DCC Concepts have addressed all of these by using their tried and tested Alpha Mimic boards. Now these have been sold with the ground signals, we've done an install of those here on Weir Yard. They're also used to great effect for their layout panels that show which way your points are set. But there's another use for them now, and that's the layout building lighting, and DCC Concepts have very kindly sent over a couple of packs for me to have a play with. So that's exactly what I did. I had to put them through their paces to see how effective they are when you install them. And I think I've also come up with a couple of other really good ideas that you can also use these for. Now they come in packs of 24 LEDs, either with or without the Mimic board, so you can use them on DC as well. You just need to have a 5 volt power supply and use them exactly the same way as you would any other LED. But they've got a self-adhesive backing and a long pre-wired set of wires to make it super easy to wire them up, and just stick them in a room, in a building, on your layout, wire them back either to the Mimic board or whatever else you want to use to control them on DC, and it really couldn't be simpler. So come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support for today's video comes from All Mouse Media, publisher of books and graphics novels, which can be found at the link down below. Check them out today, including the amazing Stars books. So stick with me and I'm going to show you the full ins and outs and lowdown on the DCC Concepts Alpha Mimic LED lighting system. I'm really grateful to DCC Concepts for sending over some samples of their all-new Alpha Mimic layout lighting products. Now, I'm sure that quite a few of you are already quite familiar with the Alpha Mimic ground signals, which we've done a full install video on Weir Yard, and also the Alpha Mimic panel LEDs, and it really was a transformational product. It made including these things so easy, especially if you're using DCC. They just work plug and play, no real soldering required, and they just worked. And really, they just work should really be a tagline that DCC Concepts use more often. One of the things that a lot of people have asked time and time again for is some really easy plug and play layout lighting to add lights to buildings. And whilst I've done some addition of lighting to buildings on Weir Yard, you always end up having to run a whole separate set of powering wires to get the power to the different locations. You need switches, and it just becomes quite a faff. Now I did experiment using the double pole double throw relays that are included on things like the ADS boards from DCC Concepts, but again it can get quite expensive if you have to buy these controller boards simply for those double pole double throw switches to turn lighting on and off, and you still have the problem of trying to run the power out to where you have the LEDs. Well, DCC Concepts now have you covered with these. There's 2 different products being released. We've got the fully DCC compatible version with the Alpha Mimic board included and all of these LEDs, and they come with a substantial amount of wire as well, so you don't have to worry about having a mimic board close to wherever you're adding these to a building. The other benefit of these is that the mimic board is DCC addressable. Now it can either mimic what other things on the layout are doing, such as points and signals, or it is possible, and this is what we're going to be doing in this video, to actually set the mimic board to its own unique set of accessory addresses, so when you address those, it is only the mimic board which changes, and it will turn on and off these LEDs, which we can then mount in buildings and such like. And I'm going to have a quick install of these on WearYard just to see how well they perform. I've got a locomotive engine shed, and it's something that I'm guessing a lot of people will have removable buildings, and I want to play about with just seeing how easy it is to get these to fit into that kind of building. I've also got a number of other permanently fitted buildings. We're going to have a go at adding lighting to those too. Now, we're going to have 12 different addressable channels on a mimic board, and there's 2 channels on each. This is exactly the same mimic board that you would get either with your panel LEDs or with your ground signals. So you could actually have it so that when one building turns on, the other building turns off, and vice versa. Or you could use a polarity change, and any of the mimic components will work with these, to have 2 channels both powering LEDs that turn on together and off together. The other product that they've sent over are exactly the same LEDs, but this is in a pack without the mimic board, and these are also perfect for any modeler that just wants to use these on a 5-volt DC supply, and then you can turn them on and off in the normal way that you would have done with any other lighting system. And it's just a really nice convenient set of LEDs pre-wired to some quite long lengths of wire, which you can then use the mimic system to be able to string these wires conveniently solder free, plug and play across your layout to wherever your switches are. The RRP on these is $79.95 for the DCC compatible version with the mimic board, and it is $49.95 if you want to just buy the LEDs on their own. These LEDs are identical to the LEDs that come in this pack, and indeed you can expand by just buying more of these packs and plugging them to this version. Now, even though you get 24 LEDs and there are 24 plugs on the mimic board, you can wire up to 3 of these to each of the outputs. Any more than that and the lights are going to start dimming quite dramatically. So it does mean that you could either light up 3 different buildings, or let's say you could have additional lights inside one big building, which is kind of the route that I'm going to try and do in that engine shed. The instructions are pretty comprehensive. We've got the pull-out sheet here on the back, which has all of the information that you need about all of the Alpha Mimic products and how to use them. This is the Alpha Mimic board that comes with it. It's the standard Alpha Mimic board, and I've already plugged this into WearYard's DCC bus. You can plug it to either your main layout bus, or if you've got an accessory bus, they are the wires that go in here, and that provides all the power that this needs. We've also got a number of other ports, including the link ports, which again you can use these to string together multiples of the mimic boards, and that just allows for simplicity, such that you'd end up with all of the channels becoming consecutive. So these would be the first 12, and then the next board plugged through the link cable would become 13 to 24, and so on. We've also got a display extension port. This is just simply for if you want to be able to visually see the command that is being received by the board, then you can buy a separate extra display which plugs in here, and you can then panel mount to the front of your layout. And then we've got the 2 control switches and the on-off button. When you first turn this on, it's natively set to 1 to 12. That's how they come out of the box. But we're going to want to set this to something a bit different. So just going to turn it off, and then with your finger on the left hand button, press that down, turn it on, and you'll see that the numbers start to flash. So we're just going to cycle through, and you can see the left hand button then cycles through the digits. The right hand button moves it across by one each time. I'm going to want to put this onto number 60, and what you're actually doing is setting the actual first address. So there we are. The next one, I want to take that all the way around to 0. And when we press it again, it goes back to flashing at the beginning there. This will be the address of the very first output. All subsequent boards will be added on to that. So this will then become 60 to 72. To confirm that, press down the right hand button and hold it down until you see yes appear on the board, and then it'll go blank. Now, when I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see that number 60 is declared as being the first address. It has remembered that setting. I can then select the accessory. I'm going to pick number 63, and I'm going to tell that from my control handset 63, and you can see it's verified that that's the command that's been sent to it. That's brilliant. The Mimic board is now set up for the addresses that I'm going to want for those LEDs. Inside the pack we get a whole load of these wires, and one of the criticisms that was levelled against the ground signals was that it was really difficult to get the plugs, which are this end, through the holes in the baseboard. So instead what they've done is you've just got the plain tails on these that you can feed through a hole in your baseboard, and then you can very quickly and easily solder these together. And they do also provide you with some pre-cut to length heat shrink just to neaten up those joints, and these are color coded too, so you've got enough black and red to deal with all of these. Plus, if you want to wire 2 or more of the LEDs together, you can also do that in this way. When it comes to taking these out of the packet, don't do what I initially did and try and peel off this whole piece. This is stuck down, and what you actually do is just gently lever out each of the LEDs and pull them through, and they've got on the back a kind of sticky tab, and this is perfect. You can just easily peel that off and then stick these to the inside of the building, and it just makes mounting these so easy. Looking to the layout on Weir Yard, I've got this engine shed, and what I want to do is add in a number of lights into this building. It is removable from the layout, built from a Wills kit. So what I want to do is actually fit it with a number of different LEDs. I'm going to use 2 different channels because I think 3 plus 3 LEDs, and I'll just have to use 2 different accessory channels to be able to actually address them. Now you can have up to 3 of those LEDs per channel, so I'm going to do just that and stick 3 different LEDs in here. I'm going to wire them together to one plug, and one of the things that I'm going to do is make it so I can unplug these from the layout if I need to, for whatever reason, lift this building away. So I've got one of the Mimic style plugs here, and I'm going to actually solder all 3 of those LEDs to this, and then I can plug the other end to the layout. First up, I'm going to stick in the LEDs where I want them. Just remove the small piece of paper off the back, and I'm going to just very carefully bend the wires so they're not going to try and push the LED back off where we've stuck it. And I'm going to stick this up here. Just put that tail to one side. I'm going to bring in the next of these LEDs. Again, remove the paper backing. Just bend these wires down so it's not going to try and force the LED off what I've adhered it to. Again, I'm going to just stick that in place. And this stick is actually really quite good. It does seem to hold very, very strongly. And I've got one final one here. Now, don't try and do more than 3 per channel because the brightness of the LEDs will drop off considerably. So I'm just going to put the final LED there. So that's the 3 adhered to the building. Now I want to wire all of these together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim the tails to the length that I need them. If necessary, I can always stick some of these wires in place out of the way, and I'm going to solder all 3 to these micro harnesses, which then gives us a nice neat plug for plugging to and from the layout. You can use the standard plugs which they sell for the Mimic, but I happen to have these around and I don't have additional plugs for the Mimic boards, so instead I'm just going to make full use of these. Joining wires together couldn't be easier, and we've talked about soldering before on this channel. I know a lot of people, they treat it almost like kryptonite or witchcraft, but it doesn't have to be that way. The reason that these come with a plug only on one end is really just for ultimate flexibility. When you drill a small hole through the baseboard, it's far easier to get just these wires through than to try and drill a hole big enough for the connector on the other end to go through. And believe me, you do need a surprisingly large hole to feed this connector through. Everything that you need for joining these together comes in the kit. Of course, if you're still really worried about soldering, then you can always use a screw terminal block, or indeed DCC Concepts sell what they call their I-link connectors, which don't even need the screw fittings, they're just a clip fit on the wires. The pre-cut heat shrink come in the colours necessary. I'm just going to get out a couple here so we can get a nice neat join. Using the No Clean Flux, again from the DCC Concepts range, just dip the wires in. These are pre-tinned and soldered, so it's actually really easy to get everything to line up and for the solder to take. The next thing I want to do is just put the heat shrink onto some of the wires first. The reason for this is that once you've soldered the wires together, there's no way of actually getting the heat shrink on. So it's the step that most people do tend to overlook and then find that they have to wrap the join with something. But then we get our preheated soldering iron, the S179 solder from the DCC Concepts range. And then what we're going to look to do is just very carefully line up these wires, and then I'm just going to very carefully solder these together. So that solder appears to have taken, and then we can just slide the heat shrink up and over the joint. Then again with the soldering iron, I just away from the tip, I just use the heat from the soldering iron to get that heat shrink to shrink down, grip the wire, and that gives us a really nice neat join that's also really strong. And then we can repeat this for the next wire. Don't need a lot of solder. The flux actually makes it very efficient. Just make sure it's taken, roll the heat shrink down, and then use the heat from the soldering iron just to get that to shrink fit, and we've got a neat tidy join that's also at no risk of any shorting taking place. And there you have it. Now got a 1 meter length Mimic cable with the connectors at either end. Of course, you can feed these through the baseboard first, then solder them, and you end up with a really neat join and plugs for either end. As a little tip for you, if you find that you have a large building, like for example a warehouse, where you need additional light but don't want to use more than one channel to do this, then you can always solder a plug to the LED with the wires reversed. This will then mean that you can plug it into the second port on a channel and it will turn on and off in unison with an LED plugged to the other socket. So I've gone ahead and trimmed these wires to length, soldered them all to one of these plugs, and then just for convenience I've added a Mimic wire onto there, so I can easily now plug that in to channel 1 of the Mimic board in there. So we're going to turn on the board, and the LEDs aren't on, but then with my NCE I'm going to choose Select Accessory. It's already highlighted as 60, and I'm going to choose to turn that accessory on, and you can see there that those LEDs come on. To turn them off, select Accessory, 60, and then we're going to turn them off, and you can see that it's as simple as that. If you find that the LEDs are on when you're telling them to be off and vice versa, then it's simply a case of swapping this plug over on the Mimic board to the adjacent companion plug for that channel. Each of these is reversed from the other. Now that we're happy that this is tested and working, I'm going to go ahead and add this into the layout. I'm going to use some of the Captain tape here, which you would normally use for DCC installs. I'm going to use a little bit of that just to hold down and neaten up some of these wires underneath the building, and then I'm going to drill the hole in the baseboard, feed the cable through, and it's as simple as that to get this building lighting up and running on the layout. This is the area where the shed normally goes. I've also removed the little hut that was glued next to it because I want to put a separately controlled light in that. And in fact, we're going to do that one first because that little hut does locate the rest of the engine shed. So I'm just going to drill the hole. Just going to open out that hole. Make sure that all is well. And I've pre-fitted the hut with one of those LEDs with the sticky pad glued to the roof, and I've got the tail hanging down. And I've actually gone ahead, and because I can, I've drilled the hole slightly larger so that I can pre-solder up the plug and just fit that down and through. Of course, if you want a smaller hole, that is easy enough to do, and then solder these underneath the layout. And it's just simply a case of feeding those wires down and through. So now I'm going to re-secure this in place and just carefully drop back into position exactly where it was before. I'll just feed those wires round and plug them in underneath. As you can see on top, no visible signs of the LED having been retro installed. We've now got the engine shed, and this is going to go in here approximately. So what I want to do now is just put the hole in that the wire will come through, and that's going to be just in this top corner just there. So I just want to make sure that I get this in exactly the right place. So I'm just going to come in here and put a small mark on the ground behind the apex of this building and across maybe half an inch, and that way it's hidden in the corner. So now very carefully line the drill up, and then the cable that we prepared earlier I'm going to feed down through this hole, and there we have the cable fed through. I've left myself a little bit of slack there, and I'm just going to plug those in underneath, feed them through the wiring runs, and just get them back to where I've fitted the Mimic board. And then it's just simply a case of plugging these in to the appropriate connectors. Just make sure that the Mimic board is turned off when you do this, just to avoid any potential problems with electrical shorts. Once we've got everything plugged in, just simply a case of turning the Mimic board on and then selecting the accessory number that we want to activate and turning them on. And you can see the building lighting up and turning them off. And you can see we've got fully DCC controllable building lights. With the engine shed just upturned so that we can double check that, select its number and they should come on, and there they do. I'm just going to turn the room lights down and there you can see turning off and turning on. That's brilliant, all tested, and now we can just work on lining this up. Any slack cable can be pulled through from underneath once the building is sat in place. One area that I found particularly useful for these is in hidden fiddle yards, where it's really difficult to see what's going on. When I select the address that I've put the lights on and turn them on, suddenly the whole road that I need to get the trains out from is illuminated, just like that. With the sticky back LEDs, they're really easy to just stick in place above the tracks. As an alternative, you could also just buy the LEDs and combine them with the ground signal actuator boards that DCC Concepts also sell. That way, you could have them linked to the points, and therefore they would come on to illuminate a particular road when the points were set for that way. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it informative, and certainly I found this to be a very versatile product. As you saw in the video, I was able to fit them, actually retrofit them to pre-existing buildings with relative ease, but certainly if you were building, say a terraced house or even a row of terraced houses, then these would be so easy to add in at the building stage, maybe even include the Mimic board in a row of terraced houses so you could have a nice self-contained unit that you only need to run 2 wires to, and then you could have a separate DCC addressable light in every single room of that building. It really has endless possibilities. I also really like the idea that because it's using Alpha Mimic, you can actually use some of these LEDs on any existing Mimic boards that you've got on your layout. And I used some unused channels on a couple of other Mimic boards that I've got to be able to turn on LED lights in my fiddle yard, just to light up some of those really hard to see roads. And it makes it so much easier to really just see which track I need to get the coaches out of when I'm looking for something in particular. So it really is a versatile product. We've got some links in the description box down below to help you find these, and certainly I think that these are going to be a very popular mainstay of the DCC Concepts range. I'd love to hear what you think about these. Do leave a comment in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Indeed, is this something that you are going to be adding to your layout as well? And I know there's a few of you with some of your really impressive builds, Mark Wilson, who might find adding in some of these DCC controllable lights really useful to really set the scene and bring it alive. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying please like, share and subscribe, and do please check us out over on Patreon to help support the channel, to keep making the videos that you want to see. And of course, as always, the KR Models PAL brick that is being produced exclusively for us is still available to order with confidence via Rails of Sheffield from the link in the description box down below. But until next time, you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabrique.co.uk. Additional support for today's video comes from All Mouse Media, publisher of books and graphic novels, which can be found at the link down below. Check them out today, including the amazing Stars books. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, Alan Dickerson, Eddie Popper, Karen Nichol, Medwin Williams, Crossways Point Junction, 3B Rail, and Jennifer Garrett. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.